Hello and welcome to this, our first webcast, in which we want to share with you all the exciting enhancements we've been making to our engagement survey and analytics tool that we call Talent Engage. I'm Lois Dabrowski, and with me today is Debbie Hance, our Head of Business Psychology, and we'd like to take you through some of the thinking about employee engagement and share the interim findings of our recent snapshot survey of HR decision makers when we asked them about their current use of employee engagement tools and, perhaps more importantly, how they'd like to take their use forward. Debbie's also going to walk you through the developments around Talent Engage. And perhaps, Debbie, we should begin with a little scene setting. What exactly is employee engagement and why the strong focus on it?
Okay, well, I think engagement has become quite a widely used and fairly well understood concept, although single and simple definitions are quite hard to come by. Perhaps one of the most widely read papers on the subject is the David McLeod and Nita Clark Engaging for Success report, and you can see on this slide here how they define engagement. So by way of background, McLeod and Clark were asked by the Department of Business and Industry in 2008, so just as the recession took hold, to look at whether a wider take-up of engagement approaches could impact positively on UK competitiveness and performance. Then their subsequent 2009 report brought together examples of how both private and public sector organisations approach engagement, and it presented some fairly compelling evidence actually for a positive correlation between organisational performance and levels of engagement among the workforce. But for us at Headlight, engagement is simply about how people feel about their work, how they relate to the organisation, how much of themselves they invest in it, and how the relationships between people, so with managers, with senior leaders and with the organisation itself, create the environment where people want to give their very best for the longer term success and sustainability of the company. However, I think that creating a single definition of engagement is probably less important than understanding the impact that strong employee engagement has on an organisation. And it's certainly less important than knowing what can be done to increase those levels of engagement when they're found to be low. So you asked why we should still be focused on it, and you'll see here on the slide that these are just some of the reasons why it should be a priority within any organisation. Now, the McLeod report contains a number of case studies from organisations who report a transformation actually in their performance and profitability through an increased focus on employee engagement. But as with all organisational research, it can be really difficult to definitively prove that the impact of one particular approach or activity has, because there are always so many interacting variables. However, the surveys and research studies have found the relationships that are shown on this slide, and I think it really makes absolute common sense to conclude that a more motivated, a happier, a more committed and involved workforce will mean things like better performance, higher productivity, less turnover and more creativity, for example. In addition to this, at Headlight we strongly feel that the relationship between engagement and talent management is a two-way and mutually supportive one. So if as an organisation you're investing in any kind of talent management activity, engagement really should be part of that picture. In order to see the return on investment in talent management activities, the workforce needs to be engaged with them and with the organisation. But equally, good talent management practices can help to drive up the levels of engagement. So it really does make good business sense to incorporate engagement into your HR and talent management strategies.
Okay, so it might make good business sense, but isn't the challenge or the objection that's often levelled at employee engagement is that some organisations simply don't have the time or the energy to look at this? Perhaps their minds and activity is elsewhere, looking at growing or stabilising the business.
Absolutely, you're right. Although I would say that having engagement on the agenda would help to address some of those other issues in the business, as engagement has been shown to be linked to so many activities and indicators of organisational performance. So you can see here from the quote from the authors of the Engage for Success report, they see it as being a fundamental requirement and equally, if not more important, during tough times. Anecdotally, we've witnessed a surge of interest in the market. So industry conferences, for instance, seem to be featuring engagement more heavily again. David McLeod and Nita Clark actually headlined the CIPD conference last November. And the Association for Business Psychology conference, which was the month before that, had a number of sessions where increasing engagement within organisations was the focus of people's talks. I think another indicator for the need for us to focus more on engagement is some more recent research results in this area. So there was a Blessing White report last year, 2013, and their findings tell us that while some parts of the globe have started to recover their engagement mojo, the UK itself still lags behind North America and India, and the reported levels of engagement here have actually stayed fairly flat. Even China, which was the only region this year to report a smaller percentage of truly engaged workers than in the UK, has seen a fairly significant hike in the levels of reported engagement compared to 2011. And I know, Lois, you've been talking to our customers, so what have they said about engagement and their approach to it?
Well, yes, indeed. We've been running a survey over the last couple of months asking HR decision makers why they use employee engagement surveys and perhaps more importantly what they do or do not want to do with the information. Overwhelmingly, the results show that the organisations want to discover what is really important in the eyes of their employees, what engagement activity they need to undertake. They also want to unearth the main sources of disengagement and find out where those real problem hotspots are with regards to engagement. And also, and this is a new move, they want to look at the link between the engagement of their people and the ability for the organisation to actually deliver on their organisational objectives. But it's probably more than this. They also want to take the information and do something with it. They want to be able to show to their managers how those managers can improve the engagement levels of their teams. So they want to take direct action. They also want to be able to judge how likely the organisation is going to be recommended as an employer by their employees. And also they want to compare themselves with other organisations, so benchmarking themselves across the industry or across organisational size. And while these seem to be challenges of what companies are facing at the moment, there are other challenges that are faced by organisations who are looking to deploy employee engagement surveys at the moment. The first is, and Debbie, you touched on this earlier, that employee engagement is a standalone activity at the moment. It doesn't tend to be integrated into the broader talent management areas. And many of the surveys on the market and that organisations are using are simply too basic, and they leave the organisation high and dry, perhaps a single score that they then report in an annual report. And often you actually have to outsource the survey to an external organisation, so you don't get to own the process or to get to analyse the results as you wish. And often taking the questionnaire statements from the survey provider. And finally, the last couple of points on this slide are about the next steps or the actions that you take afterwards, and actually giving something back to the employees so they don't see it simply as a tick box exercise. So coupled with this perhaps simplicity of the organisational employee surveys that are on the market at the moment and that are being used, and also this lack of integration with broader talent management activities, there are some pretty stiff challenges there for organisations to face.
And that's why we've made enhancements to our product. So we know, as you said, from our customers that there can be limitations with engagement surveys. And one of the key ones really seems to be this failure of organisations, or an inability with organisations to take any concrete action in response to the results from a survey. And it's not just the companies we talk to. In February last year, there was a company called Interim, and they did a UK-based study of 2,000 people from a number of companies who currently carry out engagement surveys. And what their results found was that generally people felt that engagement surveys were a top-down exercise. And this sort of reinforces rather than challenges the idea that the views and feelings of employees weren't valued by top management. I think what's really worrying about this trend is that the very practice that is meant to address issues of engagement may actually be serving to make it worse. So you're asking questions about how people feel and how they view their organisation, you raise their expectations, you bring problem areas to the front of people's minds, and then fail to do anything constructive about it. So Talent Engage is very, very much focused on helping decision makers to act on the feedback, to take practical action, to ensure people see the outcomes of the survey, and to make a real difference to people's day-to-day experiences of work. So this is about more than measurement. Engage will do that, and it will highlight areas of strength and potential opportunities to drive up engagement. And it does that by looking very carefully at the data and comparing views and opinions on what's working and what's not, to how important those things actually are in terms of how engaged people feel. The analytics in Engage go a bit deeper than many surveys, but the tool offers you all of the usual comparison capability, as you can see on the slide here, so you can cut your data any way you want it and interrogate it to provide really insightful and detailed reports which contain the information that you need in order to take meaningful action. Also, as with all of our products, Engage integrates with other talent tools, so you can really join up your efforts. So for example, if you're a manager, at the press of a button, you can then integrate your engagement actions, which are recommended on the basis of your team's results, into your own personal development plan. Individual engagement levels can be fed into, for example, the succession planning tool, so you can immediately see where your high flight risks are. So for instance, where you've got talented or high performing or high potential people who are for some reason currently disengaged. So here on the screen you'll see another feature of Engage, which is the headlight model of engagement. So what Engage provides you with, if you want to use it, is this sort of underpinning model covering the factors that really influence engagement. Now, it's probably true that what influences engagement in your own organisation is unique to your organisation, but we've done a great deal of research into what those factors are likely to be, and we've created this generic comprehensive framework. You can choose to use this, and therefore you'd have the ability to benchmark your scores with those of other organisations, or you could map your existing questions onto our questions, or you could just use your own framework, but still have the reporting and analytical capabilities that we've outlined before. But we'll talk through briefly how our model works and perhaps what's different about it, which is the different perspectives from which we view engagement. So we think that when you're measuring engagement levels and when you're looking at what can be done to increase those levels, what you really need to do is think about 3 levels of activity. So firstly, how does the culture and the structure and strategy, the purpose, the processes and policies of your organisation influence engagement? How does the behaviour of the most senior leaders impact on engagement levels across the organisation? And secondly, what do managers do or don't do that then impacts on their direct team? Now, managers are often the conduit for broader organisational activities, such as performance management and career development. So how do managers support or drive these practices? And thirdly, what do individual contributors do, feel and think that would show how engaged they are? And what can they personally do to increase their levels of engagement? And the idea here is that it really makes it clear to everybody that they have an accountability, a responsibility, and a real role to play in creating a genuinely engaged workplace. It's not just the bastion of HR and the top team. So as well as looking at engagement through these 3 lenses, we then incorporate what we call a number of engagement factors, and each one is translated into those 3 different perspectives or viewpoints. So, for instance, if we take an example, if you look at the red one on the left, which is performance management, at an organisational level, what we're talking about is the degree to which the organisation provides staff with the right tools and equipment and policies which enable them to do their jobs in an effective way. It looks at the provisions and processes for setting clear goals, for getting feedback, and so on. Moving to the managerial level, it's about seeing those things in practice. So do managers talk to their people regularly about how they're doing? Do they make their own expectations clear? Do they agree goals and standards? And do they review performance regularly against those expectations? At an individual level, we're talking about how involved people are with these processes. So do you take an active part in setting your own objectives? Do you give your manager upwards feedback? And so on. And there are 12 factors in all. They're all based on the research and literature on engagement and drawing on those things that have been found empirically to have a link to engagement levels. And we've looked more widely too at the psychology of things like motivation, organisational trust, commitment, resilience and well-being. And we then have a series of fairly simple questions that tap into the behavioural correlates of these things, and that's what forms our engagement survey questionnaire.
Okay, so that sounds like a strong model of engagement that we've developed to feed into the questionnaire itself. But it seems that people want more than a survey and a single score.
I think you're right again. So we've talked about a couple of the ways in which Talent Engage is perhaps a little different. And I think it's now worth highlighting some of the other key features that we see as offering real value to organisations and which make Engage more than just a survey. So something that we wanted to enable our customers to do was to track progress and evaluate the impact of any talent management or corporate initiatives and whether they're actually affecting engagement levels. So for instance, we have one customer who has launched a huge project to refresh their values and to build understanding across the organisation through workshops, to build awareness of how these translate into everyday work activities and behaviours. Now, using Engage, they could see whether this is having an impact by creating their own values KPI within the software. So this is a fairly simple process and involves just identifying those engagement factors and behaviours that are the focus of that initiative or KPI. So what is it you're aiming to change? and then you link them together in the system as a KPI. Then over time you can generate a report to show how views and behaviours in these areas have changed. And then using your previous example of looking at how likely it is that people would recommend a company as an employer, you could create a brand advocacy KPI and then just link the items that are relevant to that. For instance, there's an item in the questionnaire which says, I tell my friends this is a good place to work. So you could create a brand advocacy KPI, link them together, and then report over time how that might change. It's also probably worth touching, I think, at this point on the team matrix, which is a feature of our software. This is an analytical tool, and it looks at the difference between how people have rated each of the engagement factors and how important they see these things to their personal level of engagement. So this analysis then allows you to see where the real opportunities for action are. So for instance, things that people say they don't currently see or experience within their organisation or the role, but which they feel would have a really big positive impact on their level of engagement. That's a clear opportunity there to do something about it and to put an action in place that would increase engagement. Team also allows you to see areas of strength, so where the things that you're doing as an organisation or as a manager are really valued by employees and are affecting and increasing levels of engagement. And areas where you might perhaps be able to scale down your efforts or redirect resources because people don't attach enough importance to these activities.
Okay, well that sounds as though Talent Engage is quite a different employee engagement tool. It goes beyond the questionnaire and builds in a strong analytical function and takes employee engagement to the next level. If you'd like to know more about Talent Engage and how it could support you in your organisation, then please do get in touch.